Your hands are literally shaking on the drive home, not because of the workload, not because of the deadline, but because your boss made a face at you in a meeting and you've now spent 6 hours trying to decode what it meant. You are a grown adult, mortgage, credit score, strong opinions about coffee, and right now you are catastrophizing over whether your boss seemed a little cold in a Slack message that said, "K thanks." 2 letters, 1 word, your entire evening. The reaction is completely disproportionate to the event, and you know that. And somehow knowing it makes the whole thing worse. That's not how rational people are supposed to work. You know that too. Somehow that also doesn't help. Something about this specific kind of person, in this specific position of power over you, is reaching past the professional layer and touching something older. Something that has nothing to do with quarterly reports or performance cycles. We haven't named it yet. The reason a bad boss can dismantle your entire nervous system isn't about the job. It's about who this person accidentally became the moment they got authority over you. You compulsively reread an email from your boss 4 times before replying, scanning for subtext that probably isn't there. Then you rewrite your 2-sentence response 11 times because you need to control their reaction to words you're not even sure they'll finish reading. You get a genuinely positive performance review, and your first thought isn't relief. Your first thought is, they're setting me up for something. Then you feel embarrassed for thinking that. Then you think about it again anyway. You mentally rehearse how you'll explain a minor mistake before your boss even knows about it, preparing 3 different tones depending on their mood when you deliver it, the way a hostage negotiator preps for an unpredictable subject. This is for a typo, in an internal document, that no client will ever see. When your boss praises a colleague in a meeting, your stomach does something, not quite jealousy, not quite fear, something in between those 2 things. And you immediately pretend you didn't notice your own reaction, because noticing it would require explaining it. You leave a completely normal work interaction and spend 45 minutes running a forensic review of everything you said, isolating the moments where you may have said too much, or seemed too casual, or worse, didn't seem casual enough. You are building a case against yourself, and you are also the only one who asked for the trial. The strangest part is you'd never do any of this for a friend, a partner, a stranger at a dinner party. The hypervigilance is almost exclusively reserved for this one person, and if you let yourself sit with that for a second, it should be a fairly significant clue that what's happening here isn't really about work. The concept doing most of the damage here is called authority transference, when the brain maps the emotional logic of an early, high-stakes relationship onto a structurally similar one in the present. A parent, a caregiver, anyone who once had real power over your safety. The brain finds the shape of that relationship in your adult life and quietly starts running the same software. The brain isn't being metaphorical when it does this. It's running a literal pattern match, pulling the old emotional operating system forward because the power differential feels identical. Someone decides if you're good enough, someone can withdraw approval, someone can make your immediate environment unpredictable, and you can't leave without serious consequences. John Bowlby's attachment theory, extended into adult behavior by researchers like Philip Shaver and Cindy Hazen, established that the attachment system doesn't clock out at 18. It stays on. It keeps assigning emotional weight to figures who structurally resemble early caregivers, not because you're confused, not because you're broken, but because that's what the system was designed to do. You don't get a vote. Think of it this way. Your brain has a template, carved out early, reinforced over the years, and your boss just happens to fit it the way a key fits a lock, and now the whole old machine is running, full speed, on hardware that was built for a completely different relationship, in a completely different building, when you were a completely different size. Here's where it stops being funny. Because if this is accurate, if the nervous system is genuinely running childhood attachment logic in a conference room, then this was never a work problem. It was always a much older problem that happened to be wearing a lanyard. Authority transference explains the hypervigilance, the need for approval, and the surveillance of mood. What it doesn't yet explain is why the most visceral, destabilizing version of this happens specifically with bad bosses. Not just anyone with a title, not any senior colleague, but this particular flavor of bad. A terrible boss hits harder than a terrible stranger, a terrible neighbor, a terrible ex, because terrible bosses don't just have power over your job. They have power over how much you can trust your own perception of reality. When a bad boss is inconsistent, warm one day, withholding the next, praising you publicly and quietly, undermining you in a side conversation you only hear about later, they create the specific psychological condition that Martin Seligman identified in the 1960s as learned helplessness. The environment is so unpredictable that your brain eventually stops believing your actions have reliable outcomes. You try, you fail. You try differently, you fail again. Eventually, you stop trusting that trying does anything at all. This is the part worth sitting with. You are not overreacting. You are reacting exactly as a nervous system responds to an environment that was genuinely, structurally designed to make you doubt yourself. And the kicker is that this is the same mechanism your brain once used to survive an unpredictable caregiver. Your reaction isn't a weakness. It's pattern recognition running on the wrong context. If you grew up with a parent who was inconsistent with approval, loving and then suddenly cold, proud and then dismissive, present and then inexplicably distant, a bad boss doesn't just stress you out. They rhyme, at a neurological level, with the most important and most confusing relationship you ever had. Drop that sentence into the comments if it hit differently than expected. The question worth asking then is not, why does my boss bother me this much? The question is whether the person who originally trained your nervous system to respond this way actually wore a lanyard, or something else entirely. The pushback forming right now is reasonable. This is too much. I know the difference between my boss and my parents. I'm not a child. I'm just stressed about my job like any sane adult would be in a genuinely difficult environment. That objection deserves respect because it's partially true. Not everyone reacting intensely to a bad boss is working through unresolved parental attachment. Sometimes the boss is genuinely dismantling the work environment, and the stress is a proportionate response to a real ongoing threat. That's a real thing that happens to real people, and it doesn't need a psychological framework to be valid. But the tell is in the proportionality. If the reaction is specifically to approval and disapproval, if it's specifically tied to this one person's mood as it pertains to you, if there's a need for their validation that you can intellectually identify as irrational but somehow can't stop pursuing, that's not job stress. That's the older thing wearing job stress as a costume. You don't need to have had a traumatic childhood for any of this to apply. The attachment system runs on relative consistency and power differential. A somewhat unpredictable parent in an otherwise stable environment can leave exactly this kind of groove, quiet, durable, invisible until the right lock shows up. This isn't about extremes, it's about calibration. The objection is valid as a general defense. What it doesn't account for is the specific person who's been in every sentence of this video, the one you haven't consciously thought about once since you started watching, even though they've been here the whole time. It's 4:47 on a Tuesday. You've been working on this presentation for 3 days. You've revised the deck 4 times based on feedback that kept shifting, each round of notes slightly contradicting the last. You walk into the room feeling cautiously, like this one might actually be good. Your boss glances at the first slide, makes a sound, not a word, just a sound, something between a and an exhale, and moves on without saying anything. You spend the next 40 minutes presenting, but you're not really there. You're running the loop in the background the entire time. What did the sound mean? Was it bad? Was it nothing? Are they going to say something after? Should I ask? If I ask, will that seem insecure? If I don't ask, will they think I don't care about the feedback? The meeting ends. Your boss says good work on the way out. Casual, already moving toward the door, clearly thinking about the next thing. And instead of relief, you feel something much closer to suspicion. You go back to your desk and you cannot explain. Not to yourself, not to anyone who would understand why getting the thing you wanted made you feel worse than not getting it. You sit there. You try to figure out what's wrong with you. Nothing resolves. You don't figure it out. You just close your laptop, gather your things, go home, and do the same thing tomorrow. What this looks like over 2 years. Someone who was, by all accounts, competent and reasonably confident before taking this job, gradually becoming a person who apologizes before finishing sentences, qualifies every idea before anyone else has had a chance to react to it, and can no longer reliably tell the difference between their own judgment and the anticipated reaction of someone else. The calibration shifts slowly enough that you don't catch it happening in real time. You just notice one day that you've stopped sending emails without reading them 5 times first, and that this now feels completely normal, like something you've always done, like something everyone does. Over time, the hypervigilance doesn't stay contained. It generalizes outward to other authority figures, to new managers in better environments, sometimes to partners, to friendships where there's any perceived power imbalance. The nervous system learned a rule. Rules don't stay neatly in the office where they were written. The specific cost that rarely gets named is this: you stop trusting your own reads, not just of the boss, of situations, of people, of yourself. Because in an inconsistent environment, your reads kept being wrong, or seemed to be. And eventually the brain discounts the instrument. It decides the instrument is faulty. It decides you are. What you actually take away from the relationship isn't the job skills or the resume line or the professional lesson. What gets saved is the coping mechanism. The job ends, the boss moves on, you get a better role somewhere else, and you bring the full operating system with you into the new building, quietly installed, running in the background on day 1. The people who watch this video years from now won't be watching it because they have a difficult boss right now. They'll be watching it because they had one 7 years ago, and they're still catching glimpses of it. In how they read a room, in how long they linger on an unanswered message, in the very specific way they shrink before someone with a title enters the space. What follows isn't a lift, it's a relocation. The same weight, from a different angle, in better light. A bad boss doesn't reveal a weakness in you. They reveal the specific architecture of how you learn to survive uncertainty, which is actually a record of something you did successfully once, in a context where the stakes were genuinely higher than any performance review will ever be. The hypervigilance, the approval-seeking, the inability to fully trust good feedback even when you've earned it. None of that is a character flaw. It's a map of a place you already navigated. The only problem is that the map is still running when you're somewhere completely different, reading terrain that doesn't match the territory. You cannot logic your way out of an attachment pattern simply by understanding it. That's not how the nervous system works, but understanding it is the first moment you get to see the map. Actually see it, hold it at arm's length, instead of just following it without knowing you're doing so. You were never overreacting. You were solving a problem that stopped being yours a long time ago. The most damaging bosses aren't the ones who were openly cruel. They're the ones who were just inconsistent enough that you kept trying to figure them out, and quietly called that effort dedication. Every nervous system learns its rules from somewhere. The unsettling part isn't that you learned them, it's how long those rules kept getting applied after the classroom was gone. Your boss didn't ruin you. They just had the exact wrong energy for someone with your specific history. And statistically, that was always going to happen to someone. It just happened to be you. Congratulations. If any part of this felt uncomfortably specific, that's either psychology working correctly, or this channel has a strange amount of information about your life. Subscribe, and we can keep having this one-sided conversation.